know who Bill now is? Good, everybody knows Bill. Bill is a law. You can't hear me?
No, I sometimes I wonder who I am.
Oh, everybody is so quiet over there. Bill is a long time SABR member. He was the vice president of SABR for maybe 5 or 6 terms. And then he's been a director since 2015, 16, something like that.
Something like that.
He's also the head of, he does a lot with writing, and he's heading up the baseball publications team. And that sort of brings him to us tonight. He and Bruce and Paul are going to talk about the A's and the Giants' biggest blowout games. So it's all yours, Bill.
Good. I'll sort of set the big picture and then turn it over to Bruce and to Paul. What we're doing is we're discussing SABR's most recent publication. We put out one, as you know, almost every month, but this is the most recent one here, Baseball's biggest blowout games. You think I could remember the name by now. I did have some help with the Red Sox helping to set up this cover photo here. You may recognize the scoreboard. It was a game from 1950 where the Red Sox scored 29 runs. The St. Louis Browns scored 4. That qualifies as a blowout game, in case you were wondering. The biggest blowout game was not that many years ago. It was 30-3. And I guess it was Texas against Baltimore. I mean, some games are 2-1 games. Some games are 1-0. Some games are 6-2. But this book decided to look at blowout games. And as to what defined the blowout game, it's just one team scoring a whole lot more runs than another. There's no mercy rule in Major League Baseball. You get a 10-run lead, you can keep going. And there's almost nothing to stop you if you're on a roll. Some baseball purists would rather see a 3-2 game decided in the 14th inning, maybe. But there are advantages and disadvantages to blowout games. If it's a home game, I mean, the fans at Fenway Park were happy enough to see the Red Sox win 29-4. The day before they won 20-4. So they had back-to-back blowout games. But if it had been the other way around, if you were in Baltimore that day that they lost 30-3, I doubt you would have been too pleased if you were an Orioles fan. Yeah, you can make the record books, but maybe not the way you wanted to make the record books. What we did is decided to have 4 games for each franchise, coming to 120 games in all. And then I just wanted to put in a few postseason games as well to reflect that side of things. So we added 6 postseason games, and different people from SABR, including some people on this call, helped write those games up. We had 77 contributors to this particular book. So, I mean, it's a great way to get involved with SABR is to just write up a game. It doesn't have to be in a book, although it'd be more fun to be in a book. If you're a young person just starting out, great way to build a resume. If you're retired like me, great way to fill your time. And then there's plenty of room in between for just expression of fandom or pleasure. Most people write about games that they found particularly interesting. I thought about this afternoon, I was thinking maybe I should just tell somebody to pick some random game for me that has no known significance. And it would be a challenge to see what I could make out of it. Somebody send me an email if you've got an idea. The 4 games per franchise were determined mathematically. I went to Tom Ruane, one of the leaders of RetroSheet, and asked him if he could compile a list, because I know he's good at computers and has access to the whole RetroSheet database, basically going back to 1901. We didn't go into the 19th century because there just wasn't as much readily available data for games from that era. And Tom ran a program and came up with the biggest games for each team. In some cases, we made some adjustments. For instance, I think the Pirates, 5 of the 6 top games were from the 19th century. I don't know why, but for some reason, Pittsburgh won a lot of lopsided games back then. But we went with some more modern games. We set 1901 as the starting point. With both the Athletics and the Giants, each of them, as you all know, started in different cities, be it Philadelphia or New York, and maybe with a stopover in Kansas City on the way. And we do have, as it happens, some representatives of the New York Giants are in the book, and there's both a Philadelphia and a Kansas City athletics game in the book as well. But we do have some authors here, and the team captains will introduce them perhaps, but we have one author from an Oakland game and one author from a San Francisco Giants game, and they're willing to talk about their games. What I did was to reach out to different chapters. You may have seen an email at some point when I was maybe trying to find somebody from the Bay Area that would be willing to become the organizer of, we'd already picked the games because that was done by Retro Sheet, but to find people that would write the games or write an overall essay on that team's game. So I called these people team captains. I suppose in baseball, I should have called them managers, but that's what I call them anyhow. And what I like to do is pretty much turn this over to the two of them alphabetically. If we go Oakland first and then San Francisco second. Paul Hofmann was the team captain from for the Oakland Athletics, and then Bruce Enos was the team captain for San Francisco. Why don't we go to Paul first and then Bruce second? You can talk about your essay about your look at the team and their history of blowout games, and then maybe introduce the person from your section of the book that was one of the authors. Each of you wrote 2, of course, but so take it away, Paul, if you're willing.
Well, thank you, Bill, and good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to have this opportunity. In the spirit of full transparency, I am also a team captain for the Detroit Tigers in the book, and I am a diehard Tiger fan. The A's are my second love, if I can say. When I first started following baseball in the early 1970s, there was a American League Championship Series between the Oakland Athletics and the Detroit Tigers that did not go our way. But at that time, I was a little young, and I did not carry a grudge towards the A's as I tend to carry a grudge towards the Giants today. After sweeping the Tigers. So I have a soft spot for the A's. It was a wonderful opportunity to write up a short essay about A's blowouts and the history of A's blowouts. I thought it shaped up very well because, as Bill talked about, the essays covered a 100-year period, covered the Philadelphia Athletics, Kansas City Athletics, and there are 2 essays in there during the Oakland era. The Athletics are one of the all-time great American League franchises. They boast the 3 dynasties, the 1910 to 1914 dynasty, the 29 to 31 dynasty, and then of course the 1970s, the 71 to 75, and that's the dynasty that just captivated me. I just fell in love with the Kelly green uniforms and the Fort Knox gold and the high stirrups, just beautiful uniforms. And for a 7-year-old at that time, boy, that was just unbelievable to see these flashy uniforms. A lot of history. As I was researching this, I discovered some little known facts I didn't know before. The Athletics are one of those franchises that have seen the great times, as we talked about, 10 100-win seasons, and at the same time 16 100-loss seasons. So they've seen the ups and downs. 15 American League pennants, 9 World Series championships. I wrote up one article in there, one game that covered the Philadelphia era, and I won't go into much detail about it. It was the May 18th, 1912 game, and I invite you to read it if you have a chance, because it features the only time an ordained Catholic priest pitched in the major leagues. And he was not ordained at that time. He was a student from St. Joseph's University. But I encourage you to read that. One of the games from the Oakland era was September 30th, 2000. And that was the A's beating the Rangers 23-2. And I think we have Gary Belleville here to talk about that. Gary,
Yes.
Are you here?
I am.
I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I was also a team captain for another team. I did the Seattle Mariners, and I wrote up 2 of their games. And coincidentally, both of those games were blowouts of the Texas Rangers. So I did 3 articles for this book. All 3 were the Rangers being on the losing end of a blowout. So I have nothing against Texas. That was pure coincidence. But this was my first book project. At the time, I had written maybe half a dozen games projects articles, all on the Montreal Expos. And I wanted to get involved in a book project, but didn't really know how. And Bill sent an email out to the Pacific Northwest chapter asking for volunteers. And I jumped at it. And it was a really good experience on my first book project. It brought back a lot of really great memories. I did 2 games at either end of the Mariners' glory years. And I live in Victoria, British Columbia. And back in the 90s, I kind of jumped on the Mariners bandwagon. And I didn't really think I had that strong of an emotional connection to that team. But in doing the research, it really brought back a lot of great memories and made me realize that, yeah, I was really emotionally invested back then. I think it was a couple of months after that, I got asked by Bill to do this Oakland article, and it was really a lot of fun to look into. So I'll talk a little bit about that game, the 23-2 game on September 30th, 2000. I'll take you back to the year 2000, and it was a real up and down year for the Athletics. They had losing months in July and August, and looked like maybe they might drop out of the race. And September 1st, they blew a 3-run lead against the Blue Jays in Toronto and lost 4-3, and it left them 2.5 games at a first. But instead of collapsing, Oakland went on a tear. And Jason Giambi had a monster month. He hit 400 with 13 homers and 32 RBIs that September. And 2000 was also the big coming out party for the big 3. Hudson was in his 2nd season, and Mulder and Zito were rookies, and they were just lights out in September. In the last 29 regular season games, they went 13-1 with a 1.88 ERA. I'd forgotten just how dominant they were that year. And this particular game was on a Saturday afternoon, last weekend of the season, and coming into the game, Oakland had won 20 of their last 26 games. And they had a half-game lead on Seattle in the AL West. Cleveland was a full game back of Seattle for the wild card, so it was still not certain that the A's would make the playoffs. So this had big playoff implications. And Zito got the start against a struggling Darren Oliver, who had battled shoulder problems that year, and he had been knocked around for his previous 7 or 8 starts. That continued in this game. He didn't get out of the first inning. Oakland sent 13 men to the plate and scored 9 runs. Big contributors that inning were Terrence Long and Randy Velarde. They both had 2 hits in the inning and scored 2 runs each. And the game was quickly out of hand. It was 15-1 after 5. And as usually happens in these games, the manager empties his bench. That's what Art Howe did. But Oakland just kept hitting and hitting. And they had an 8-run inning in the 7th to put the icing on the cake. Texas got 1 more in the 9th, but the final was 23-2. But Seattle and Cleveland both won that day, so it wasn't quite enough to clinch a playoff spot. But it put them in a really strong position. The only way they could not make the playoffs is if they lost the next day, the final day of the season. Then they would have had to have played a makeup game against Tampa Bay. There was a game that was canceled because of a hurricane that year. And if they lost that, then they would have had to have lost a tiebreaker. And then both Cleveland and Seattle would have had to have won out. So it pretty much clinched it. But the next day, Hudson pitched a gem, and they won the West by half game. And then in the playoffs, Oakland lost the ALDS to the Yankees in 5 games. And I wrote at the end of that article that it was the start of a string of heartbreaking losses in winner-take-all games. And when I wrote it in 2018, I wrote that that was the first of 8 consecutive losses in those games. And then in 2019, it was stretched to 9 games. And I'm pleased that this year, finally, Oakland defeated the White Sox in an elimination game in the wild card series. So quite happy to write something redundant when it's a positive outcome for the Athletics. Just a personal note, I've been digging into Philadelphia Athletics history of late. And I wrote a Games Project article on Dick Fowler's no-hitter in 1945. He was the first Canadian to throw a no-hitter. That's why I was interested in that. I like telling Canadian stories. And I'm currently writing Dick Fowler's biography. So I'm starting to get a bit of an attachment to the Philadelphia Athletics. So if anybody knows how I can get my hand on a blue Philadelphia Athletics hat, please let me know, because I've been trying to run one down. And that's pretty much it. I'll turn it back to you, Paul.
Oh, thank you, Gary. At this time, I think we can go over to Bruce, and Bruce can tell us a little bit about the San Francisco Giants.
Okay, hello. Thanks for inviting me. I'm kind of thrilled. I was told that, are you hearing me? Because my little thing is not lighting up. Okay. Anyway, I'm very pleased to be named a captain, which for me, who was cut from the junior varsity at my junior high school, and that was as far as I ever got in baseball. Being the captain of the Giants is quite an honor. Thank you, Bill. I will never forget this.
You got further than I did if you got cut from a team. I didn't get on it to get cut.
It was an ugly getting cut, too. But at any rate, doing the this was kind of a strange thing. I just volunteered to write the introduction in the first place, and the Giants have a history of a lot of success until about the 70s, when they were in the hole for a while, and then they finally have gotten out in the 2000s with the 2010, 12, and 14 victories, and now they seem to be heading into terra incognito. We don't know where they're going. So we'll have to wait and see on that. What I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about is the game itself. And let's see, what have I got here? What I found interesting about writing about this particular game, which was a huge, what was it?
It was at Candlestick.
It was at Candlestick. It was on July 9th, and 21 the Giants got, and I think the Cardinals got 2. 2, that's right. What was happening about that time? I have to go back, and I didn't do my homework like I told you that I wouldn't. What was happening in 1987, the Giants and the Cardinals had played off, and as I recall, the Cardinals won that game. And in 1988, things were going substantially different, but not so much for the Giants. Giants were typically in second place, chasing the Dodgers as usual. And the Cardinals, however, were on hard times. They basically had lost Jack Clark, who was their only power hitter. And so they had Willie McGee and Ozzie Smith and Templeton and Bernansky as their hitters. And as Joaquin Andahar said, These guys were basically, you had, this year they had, or in 1987, they had Jack Clark and 8 leadoff hitters. In 1988, they had just 8 leadoff hitters and a pitcher. And so they were not hitting at all, according to the manager. Now, this game to me was interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's not really about, for me, writing these stories is not so much about the baseball, it's about the writing about the baseball. So I'm looking at the writing of the newspapers. And one thing I've noticed is that the 80s and even the 60s in San Francisco, the newspaper headlines and the newspaper columns were much more graphic, much more descriptive, and much more entertaining than what I see today in the newspaper about games. This game was characterized by, as the title of the thing is, Eric Bovens, who is a writer for the I believe it was the Examiner, said it's called the game a cyclorama, batting go round, the house of chuckling fun, and land of 10,000 home runs. So what's that all about? Well, first of all, a cyclorama deals with Chris Spire, who came up in 1971, and that year the Giants made it into the playoffs. I recall that. I was a senior at Cal at the time. I remember listening to the last game of the season when Spire was playing shortstop, got the final out, and after the game, he told the announcers that he was just thrilled that he was the person who made the final out. Spire later spent 3 years was in the All-Star game. It was traded in, I think, 76 to the Montreal, and spent a career basically as a slightly above average journeyman shortstop and second baseman. He made it back to the Giants and was playing this day because Robbie Thompson, the regular second baseman, was injured. And so he's playing second base, and he was just kind of finishing out his career. Now, so as the game proceeded, he got singles, he got a home run, he got a couple of doubles. And then in the later innings, he's at bat and he hits a ball out into the far distance, but it's not a home run. And he's got a cycle, possibly. Now, if he pulls this off, if he can make it to third base, he's getting pretty old at this point and he's getting tired. And he manages to race through it and run through Bill Fahey, the third base coach's stop sign, told him to stop at second. He said, to heck with it, he's going to come on in. So he came and staggered into third base and got himself a cycle. So that was one of the interesting things about the game that was, which I didn't expect. But I was pleased to see that Spire had done it, and I had kind of an attachment to Spire since I'd seen him in his first seasons. And now I saw him do this, which was kind of unusual because when I got this game in the first place, Bill gave me a choice of another the game at Oracle Park or this game. So I just picked this one randomly. And so I had Spire's cycle. Then we have the other thing, what's his name? Dennis Riles, I think it was. I should know that. Hits a home run in the late innings where it's no longer a competitive game. And it's the 10,000th home run for the Giants franchise. So they announce it. The manager grabs the ball, grabs the bat, and says, "I'm going to send it to Cooperstown." And this is great, except that and that was based on the record keeping of the franchise. A couple of days later, a reporter from the Oakland Tribune discovered that no, really, there was another there were another 26 games that weren't counted by the franchise, and really Will Clark had hit the home run earlier in the year. And so that wasn't a 10,000th game. So that stood as the rule for a while, that Will Clark had hit the 10,000th game. Then when the Giants were finally getting to their 12,000th home run in franchise history, they finally took a look at it again, and a couple of historians for the the sfgate.com, fellow named Harry Schulman rechecked the entire thing and found out, no, it wasn't Will Clark who hit the home run. And the home run that Riles hit was actually the 9,998th home run. And actually, Robbie Thompson hit it a couple of days later in Pittsburgh. So that was the interesting stuff that that was important in the game. The game itself was exciting, and what was most interesting about it was the 3 games prior to it had all been Giants shutouts. The Giants they had won all but 2 games in July. And they're looking for a 4th straight shutout. And that didn't happen. The Cardinals scored 2. But they were hoping for a, heck with it. Anyway, there was a hope that it was going to be another shutout. That didn't happen, but the pitcher finally was relieved because as he said, a couple of other guys in the bullpen needed some work, and obviously the game was in the bag. So so that's essentially what happened. For me, as a learning experience, since this was only my 2nd game I ever wrote for SABR, I started learning how to do academic notation and keeping track of the records of how to do citations, how to quote a newspaper properly. And that was more entertaining for me, since I would normally do legal citations in my real life, in my former real life. But at any rate, the Giants won it, and I'm going to keep working at. Right now, I'm doing another project dealing with the Pacific Coast League, and I may talk with Zach about that later. Doing it about a ball player from the 50s named Ed Erott, who was a pretty good player for the Cincinnati Reds for a few years and for the Padres for quite a number of years in the PCL. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to Bill and go from there.
Why don't we turn it over to Diane MacLennan? I know Diane from a long time ago in the Boston area, but she can tell about her migration west, perhaps, and tell us about the game at Pacific Bell Park that she wrote up.
So as Bill mentioned, I've known him for quite a while. I am originally from Boston, and as I always tell people, you can't be a Bostonian and not be a baseball fan. It's just like breathing. It's just a way of life. And I ended up in 2007 working for Curt Schilling I built his HR department when he had the video game company. And it was an interesting experience working for Curt. He's a really wonderful person. I just want to have that on the record, but unfortunately, sometimes his personality gets in the way, but he's actually a great person, and they have a really great family. But I've always been I always loved baseball. Even though I was a Red Sox fan in Boston, I just found the game of baseball itself incredibly interesting. And people think it's a boring game, but I actually appreciate the inaction of the game. So when I first joined SABR, and it was, gosh, Bill, I can't even remember how long ago that was. It was in the early 2000s, and I think it was before I was working for Curt, actually. I got this request from Bill saying, we're doing a book on the 1967 Red Sox, The Impossible Dream. Here are some of the players that are left. And Sparky Lyle was one of them. And I said, I can't write about Sparky Lyle. He was a Yankee. But I ended up saying, I'm a writer, I can do this. So it was an amazing experience to actually dive into the heartbeat, the ERA, the statistics of what made him so great. And then I got another assignment, and when Bill did the 48 Boston Braves, my grandfather was a Boston Braves fan. So that was very special for me. And I wrote about Bobby Hogue. And I said, I think I just like writing about left-handed pitchers. I don't know why, but I just had a lot of fun doing it. And what intrigued me about this game, and then I took a hiatus. I ended up moving from Boston to Los Angeles in 2009, which is where I am now. And I'm a Giants fan, which I'm glad there's no LA Dodger fans in the area, because I don't like the Dodgers. I actually do like the Giants. I find them so much fun to watch. They're just exciting. And I love the National League because I just feel like it's a more purist way to play the game. You know, there's no designated hitter, except for this season. I'm not even going to discuss this season right now. So when I saw the list of the games that Bill presented, I looked for something that was unique. And for me, anything against the Expos was unique, because that team doesn't really exist anymore, even though they're, you know, the Nationals. And because I'm a Giants fan, and I just really had this fascination with who was on both of those teams at the time of this particular game. So Bill Miller, who ended up being on the Red Sox, who was such a fan favorite, JT Snow, do I need to say more? And then, of course, Barry Bonds. And then on the other side, on the Expo side, you had Orlando Cabrera, who we loved in Boston. He did the most amazing acrobatics at shortstop. And then Vladimir Guerrero, who ended up on the Angels. So I just thought, what an amazing dynamic that these two teams probably had at this time. And for it to end up being an 18-0 game, I really got to dive into this and see what happened. So the title of my piece is The Beginning of the End for the 2000 Montreal Expos, because on that day, May 24th, 2000, they were actually in second place in the NL East, and they were only 4 games behind the Braves at that time. And the Giants, they had a 25-17 record. And the Giants on that day had a 19-23 record. They were 4th. They were 8 games behind the Diamondbacks. I thought, oh, there's no way, you know, this is going to be just a fluke. You know, there's going to be a blowout game. And then, you know, the Expos are going to have this amazing season. Well, that's not exactly what happened. And I also found it interesting that usually blowout games take a little while. This one took only like 2 hours and 40 minutes. It was a pretty quick game in my estimation, in my opinion. So I really had fun researching this. And one of the resources that I used was backtobaseball.com. And it allowed me, because it was, you know, going back in time, the resources weren't as much available as they are now. So what it did, it literally gave me a play-by-play, and there was some animation on how the game was played. So it was so much fun to watch, believe it or not. So one of the things that was also really intriguing to me was the pitcher, Sean Estes. I hope I said his name right. And I felt that he really needed a shout out, because he not only pitched a shutout game, but he, you know, 5 RBIs, one of them being a grand slam in the 5th inning. So I just had so much fun writing about this team. And like I said, I don't have a whole lot to say about it, because the piece that I wrote is pretty much inning by inning, you know, bat by bat, you know, pretty much how the game played out. But what I thought was the most interesting part was how everything flipped at the end of the season. So we have the Giants ended up doing much better. They didn't really do well in the playoffs, but they ended up with a really good season. And the Expos just pretty much tanked. And it was like a downhill from then on down. So they didn't really have a very good season after that. So I just had a lot of fun, you know, writing this piece. This is, like I said, my 3rd SABR publication. I'm currently a PhD student, so I'm not really sure when I'll be able to pick up another writing assignment, but I am looking forward to the next one. And I know whatever Bill comes up with in terms of whatever type of book he's going to have, it's going to be exciting. So again, this is my first SABR meeting that I've been able to participate in just because of my schedule. So I'm thrilled, and I'm so happy to be a part of the West Coast side right now. So I was watching some of the chats about the snow on the East Coast, and I love it because it was like 77 here today. So sorry to say, down here by the beach. But thank you so much for allowing me a chance to talk about this game and listen to everyone else. I've really enjoyed this. So thank you so much. And thank you, Bill.
Well, Diane, between the Red Sox and the Giants, you've seen 7 world championships in like the last 15 years or so.
Yes,
16
I
or
have.
17 years.
Well, part of it is because my youngest daughter had a crush on Tim Lincecum, so I kind of had, it was kind of through that. So I actually drove 1 year, I don't know if you know this, Bill, when I was still on the East Coast, I wanted to see the Red Sox spring training so bad when they were in I drove from Boston to Fort Lauderdale and then over to Fort Myers. So it's a little bit of a sickness here. And then going up, you know, to AT&T Park and watching, just being in that San Francisco environment and just being in that ballpark, which is so gorgeous. It was the coldest July day I've ever spent in my life. I had to buy gloves and a scarf for that game. But I love baseball people. I love that we love to talk the same language. And I'm just so thrilled. I'm just so thrilled to have this opportunity. So thanks again.
Well, some people may have some questions in general. I think that if you do have a question for any of the other authors or just in general, feel free to unmute yourself maybe one at a time and ask away. Paul Hofmann and I are actually working on another book that was Paul's idea now. It's an athletic book, if you want to look at it that way. It's the 1883 Athletics of Philadelphia. Goes back a few years.
So I'm curious, what's the oldest game that's in this book?
Well, that's a question we couldn't answer too quickly here. We did cheat a little bit. I just looked at the table of contents. I said we started in 1901, but that the Pirates had an awful lot of 19th century games. There is an 1887 game. It was Pittsburgh Alleghenies 23, Boston Beaneaters 3. And one of the other games was from the 19th century also for the Pirates, a 25-2 win over St. Louis in 1893. I think those are probably the 2 oldest ones. There were a couple of games this year that would have made the book, except the book was already out. And this year kind of doesn't count anyhow in some ways, unless you're a Dodgers fan, I suppose.
A question regarding the postseason games that you have in the book. Did you by any chance include, this isn't the craziest margin manageable, but did you have Game 7 of the 1985 World Series? Royals 11, Cardinals nothing. I feel like for postseason, that's especially notable. Blowout and shutout.
Notable, but it didn't make it. I see. The let's see, what do we have? The table of contents here is not well organized. There was a 23-7 game where the Red Sox beat Cleveland in 1999. Oh. And then Cleveland beat Seattle in a 2001 game that made it. Braves beat the Cardinals 15-0 in Atlanta in 1996. Another Red Sox game just 2 years ago when the Red Sox beat the Yankees 16-1. There was a Yankees beat the Giants at the Polo Grounds in 1936, and then Atlanta Braves beat the Cardinals in 1996. Two games actually where the Braves beat the Cardinals in the 1996. Both a game on October 14th and a game on October 17th.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah. There's
it's Tom
definitely
here.
That's a game you could write up, certainly, if it's not already been written.
Good.
I don't know if you want to consider this a blowout or not, but I believe my illustrious cousin gave up more runs in a half inning pitching for Boston back in the day. They're about the 20s, early 20s. Does anybody have that? I know he gave up more runs than anybody else.
There are games that you might think would have made the book in some ways. One of the games that a Red Sox game also, June 27th, 2003, the Red Sox scored 14 runs in the first inning. And they scored 10 of those runs before they even made the first out. Talking about a cyclorama. The Johnny Damon had a single, a double, and a triple, all in the first inning. He didn't get up a fourth time, or else maybe he would have hit the home run, but in that same inning would have been pretty amazing. The final score was 25-8, which is pretty much of a blowout, but that's only a 17-run differential, and it didn't make the top 5 for the franchise.
Bill, do most of the you guys do most of the stories include time of game?
I don't think that, I mean, it's up to the individual author to put in there. Mm-hmm. You would think that a game that had so many runs scored would take an unusual amount of time, but as we already heard, that's not necessarily the case, especially if one of the teams is scoring 0 runs, maybe just getting up and popping up to the shortstop and going back to the dugout or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any notable pitchers who came out on the wrong end of the shot or the blowout?
Pardon?
Are there any notable pitchers who came up on the wrong side of the blowout?
I don't remember, actually. Any of the other authors remember that? They have to have been.
Yeah.
When you get this many games, and as you know, with baseball in general, there's always something different that seems to happen.
Bill, I had a question for you or some of the other authors. There's basically a unwritten rule, you know, when a team scores a lot of runs that they quit pouring it on, and some players take special exception to that. Did you find that was true in the past? All that there was commentary in the press that
I don't remember that coming up in any of the articles. I mean, it's like a bat flip or something. You're not supposed to flaunt your success. I don't know. I mean, baseball is such a game of individual achievements. Why would you go up and decide to, you know, foul out or something?
Yeah. Well, I know in my game, all the starters were pretty much gone, except for Spire.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah. So the manager made the decision to.
Yeah. Well, he wanted to give these people some rest.
Yeah.
This is Steve Treader.
What's the game with the biggest? Go ahead.
This is Steve Treader here. It says WMG Meetings there, but this is Steve. As a Giants fan, one of the very worst blowout games in Giants history that I remember was July 3rd, 1966 at Candlestick Park against the Atlanta Braves, where the Giants lost by only 17-3, which may not make your criteria, but Tony Cloninger, the pitcher for the Braves, hit not one, but 2 grand slams, and also had a sacrifice fly, so he drove in 9 of the Braves' 17 runs.
What was the score?
17-3.
So that was a 14-run differential. I see that 17 runs was the smallest one in the book. Yeah. So it didn't make it. There was a 20-1 game against the Cardinals, 18-0 against the Marlins, 18-1 against the Cubs, and 20-3 against the Marlins.
Yeah, I remember listening to the Tony Cloninger game.
Me too.
Yeah.
I was 8 years old and I was crushed. I thought the world had come to an end.
Yeah. I was just impressed that a pitcher could hit 2 grand slams.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question. What was there in most of these cases, or what's the percentage of cases where a position player pitched in these games to end him?
Yeah, I don't recall that coming up. I'm sure it did once or twice in the books. I mean, it certainly happens in real life. I don't recall that right now.
I know it didn't happen in my game, but.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it didn't happen in the 3 I wrote about it. Actually, I was surprised because I've read probably half the book by now, and I I think I only recall reading it about once so far. You'd think it would happen a lot more often than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, my game,
Wow.
my game, the pitcher threw 121 pitches in a complete game. For this one.
You might more often see that on the losing side rather than the winning side.
Yeah. But I mean, if it's a winning side, it's not a shutout or something like that. I mean, take the guy out maybe.
Sure.
Give him some rest.
So every franchise is in there 4 or 5 times. What franchise is in there the most?
Well, it's 4 each.
Okay, but
Yep. So
if you're on the bad side of it, you could be in the book more, couldn't you?
oh, true. Yeah, I didn't add up the bad sides as much.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
I'll have to check it when I get the book.
Great,
Yeah.
great question.
I hope everybody knows here that all SABR books are free to SABR members if you electronically can download them one way or another.
I actually asked for a Kindle for Christmas so I can start reading them.
Yeah, yeah.
Was
I
there
know
ever an next
I
meeting
mentioned
blowout?
in the Pacific Northwest chapter meeting recently, there was a game that I recall. It was in Yankees. It was one of the games the Yankees won, and they won at Fenway Park. So it wasn't a happy day for Red Sox fans. I was not there. I think it was like 20. It was 22-1 on June 19th, 2000. They scored 16 runs in the last 2 innings. So actually the game was reasonably close up to the 7th. And then all of a sudden 16 runs. And one thing that was kind of remarkable about that game to me is that I had a good friend whose name was Lib Dooley. She had been to, I think, something like 42 years worth of Red Sox games, never missing one. I mean, she might have missed one once in a while, but she was one of the people that got me really into writing. She was a good friend of Ted Williams, and we used to meet at the Ted Williams Museum down in Florida. And then she got me started by telling me I should write a book about Johnny Pesky, which was a great experience to work with Johnny. And on that book, I spent a lot of time with him. And she had a front row seat at Fenway Park, right by the Red Sox on deck circle. Perfect seat. Her dad was even involved in 1901, helping secure the land on which the Huntington Avenue grounds were built. So she had a pedigree that lasted a century because she died that day, June, whatever I just said it was, in the year 2000. She died that morning. She did not have to suffer through seeing that particular game.
Bill, I have a question. When you were doing the Pesky history or biography, did you have much information about what he was doing when he was at Lincoln High School in Portland?
Well, I went up to Portland to see what his family home looked like. His brother Vince, he's in hospice at the moment, but he was up there at the time, and I got a chance to visit him. I got a chance to see 2 or 3 of the other people that had played with him, because this was 20 years ago that I was visited there in the late 1990s. I got to see where the Beavers played, and met the son of the groundskeeper that was involved, Rocky Benevento, that was took care of the ballpark at the time. And it was kind of interesting, just a few days. It's the only time I've ever been to Portland. But then I went down to Beaverton and Bend, which were 2 other communities in which Johnny played. I had a very enjoyable visit there, and learned a fair amount about baseball in Portland.
Was he a member of Cam's Kids, that American Legion team?
I think so. I don't remember that, but it sounds right.
I need to talk with you about this offline sometime about.
Yeah, sure. I'm on email, and the books I can send you any portion of the book or something like that.
Okay,
probably.
That sounds good.
Were you up in Portland at the time?
No. He's part of my bio on Ed Erod.
Oh, okay.
Because he went to Lincoln High as well and played on Cam's Kids.
Yeah, okay.
Was there ever an extra inning blowout?
I don't think so, because that would have been really astonishing. I would remember that.
Yeah. I mean, go into the
10th inning that scores 1-1, and then the visiting team obviously would have to be the one that was pouring the runs on it.
Right.
The next book coming out is a story of the greatest comeback games. And many of those did go into extra innings because there was 7 or 8 runs maybe scored in the 9th and tied it up and then put it into extras. And there are a couple of them that, twice that happened. Maybe both teams scored 2 runs in the 14th and they had to play another couple innings.
Bill, do you want to talk a little bit about the distribution of these games throughout the season? Because I'm surprised at the answer. I would have expected there to have been more late season blowouts.
Yeah, I would have thought there would have been 2 or possibly April, but a team that's maybe just out of it in September and the other team is, I don't know, trying to fatten their averages. But somebody had asked that at a prior a prior session where we were discussing this, and it was not true. The 20 of the games were from April, 14 from May, 20 from June, 23 from July, 18 from August, 21 from September. So they're very, very evenly spread. It was remarkable, though. The date May 20th jumped out when I was kind of plotting this out, seeing, because somebody asked me that question while we were working on the book, and May 20th, 1994, 2 of the games in the book were from that very same date. Seattle beat the Rangers and the Twins beat the Red Sox. And then 2 years later, also on May 20th, the Braves beat the Cubs. And then 10 years after that, also on May 20th, the Diamondbacks beat the Braves. So 4 out of the 120 regular season games all happened on May 20th. And yet May was the month that had the fewest games in general. So, I mean, it's just bizarre.
That's right.
Wait, Marshall is leaving for another Zoom session. That's I got to go to sleep here sooner or later, but
All right.
no, actually I got something to do for another hour or so, but it's great. I love these Zoom sessions because you get to see people you haven't seen for a long time sometimes, and meet people that you've never met before virtually. Not all of us get to every SABR convention.
So far, or any.
Yeah.
Or any. Yeah, I went to I went from 2001 through 2018. I went to every one of those. But then last year, despite being on the board, they scheduled the convention at the same time that the Red Sox were playing the Yankees in London, England. And I couldn't pass up the chance to see the first Major League Baseball games played in Europe. I have seen the Red Sox play in Japan when they played against Oakland. In 2008, I went over for that series. I've seen them play some spring training games in places like the Dominican Republic and so forth. But if they're playing Europe, I couldn't pass that one up. Terrible games, but it was still a nice experience. Both starting pitch, I don't know if you remember it, both starting pitchers got knocked out in the first inning. It was like, and it wasn't exactly like Denver. I mean, London is not 8,000 feet high or 5,280 feet high like Denver. It was just a weird day. A lot of home runs.
Well, Bill, we really appreciate your time, and you're it's what 11 o'clock where you're at right now, so
yep.
We especially appreciate it. And then also rounding up all the other captains for the other teams is definitely appreciated, and this was great because it was able to provide a lot more interaction than some of the prior ones where we have maybe 1-2 speakers. This has been very good, and I really appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody who joined us as well to ask questions and participated in that way as well. And again, if this is your first time joining us, Dusty Baker Sacramento chapter or the Lefty O'Doul Bay Area chapter, we've been meeting about once a month and having speakers from throughout the country. So please consider joining us in the future as well. And again, Marlene was going to have an informal chapter meeting coming up pretty soon. And, Marlene and I will also schedule another joint chapters meeting where we'll have a speaker sometime within the next month. And again, thanks to everybody for joining us.
So, we're also starting to plan for Sabre Day
Right.
in January. And the big Sabre Day is going to be, everything will be virtual probably, but the big Sabre virtual meeting on January 30th, I think early afternoon, but it'll be sort of mid-morning for us in the West Coast. But Zach and I would like to plan some other events around that. So if any of you, we've got some ideas, but if any of you have ideas of speakers or any kind of programming that we can do virtually, please let us know. And do that at any time, but
Absolutely.
Kicking off the big 50th anniversary. And hopefully we'll all be able to get together in Baltimore.
I want to thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Bill.
Take care.
See you guys.
Everybody.
Have a great night. Thanks,
Glad you
everybody.
Stay well.
Zach. Good to see you,
Thanks.
Marlene. Zach, I'm glad you got off the
Nice to
mountain.
see you in person someday.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.